Welcome to The Thriving Mama, the podcast that teaches you not just how to survive, but to thrive in motherhood. I'm your host, Dr. Stephanie Davis. Celiac disease is an autoimmune condition that is near and dear to my heart for many reasons, including family history and it being one of the most common issues I see in my practice, especially among families. Celiac disease affects at least 1% of the world's population, and that doesn't even include non-celiac gluten sensitivity or the people that haven't reported their diagnosis. This is a very real issue for so many people, especially in North America, where wheat and the fields it's grown in are heavily sprayed with chemicals such as the weed killer Roundup or glyphosate, fungicides, propiconazole and tebuconazole, and the insecticide chlorpyrifos. The original grain that humans began cultivating some 10 to 12,000 years ago is also very different from what we consume today, especially in the US, where it has been hybridized to the point that our bodies may react to it. It can be difficult to diagnose even with increased awareness, since most symptoms are outside of the gut. And then learning how to manage it and thrive in life can be even more confusing with conflicting information, especially if management is strictly from conventionally trained practitioners, which is why I'm excited to have my friend Irene Ortiz-Colella on to share her journey of her celiac diagnosis and how she overcame it and turned it into a family business. Some of the highlights include dispelling the myths surrounding celiac and non-celiac gluten sensitivity, such as, does the whole family have to be gluten-free? Will going gluten-free cause nutrient deficiencies? The symptoms are all GI, organic is the same as gluten-free, and more. Next, we'll be touching on tips on thriving with celiac with a young family. And lastly, how to overcome identifying with the diagnosis so you can heal and have vitality in your life. Irene Ortiz-Colella is a mom and entrepreneur. In 2016, she and her family decided to move to a farm to embrace a healthier lifestyle. After her celiac diagnosis and given her holistic background allowing her to understand the impact of food on health, she felt compelled to assist others in leading healthier lives. Discovering that her youngest daughter also had gluten sensitivity further motivated her to develop more delightful gluten-free products for her enjoyment. This was the inspiration and motivation for her company, 3 Farm Girls. If you're confused about where to start addressing your own health, or you've tried all of the things and nothing has worked, I offer podcast listeners a free global health check in which we'll evaluate your physical, mental, and emotional health and provide useful resources to help you on your journey. You'll find that link in the show notes. So I'm so excited today to have Irene on because she has so much experience, not just with celiac, but being a mom. And I do special segments, and I am having this one be real mom talk. So I'm excited to dive into both your story from the celiac perspective and how you transformed that into a business, but also like how you manage it as a mom. And so thank you so much for being on today.
Thank you. So I've had so many experiences with my digestive system. And so it's interesting because I went to chiropractic school thinking I know so much. And, I thought I knew so much about me. But really, I feel like when I went at the time, we weren't very aware of the gut health as we are today. Like, I feel like now we finally have scientific proof how the gut access to our brain. But I feel like at the time we had no idea. And all the time I was just miserable. Like I was absolutely miserable. And as a college student, what do we eat? Like pastas and breads and cheap things so I can survive, right? Like I was on a budget at the time. And I was just so sick all the time. And I didn't know why. Like I just thought, I went to the doctor. They said you're low in B12, which now I know that's obviously a sign of what I have. And then they just said, just take your supplements, you'll be fine.
Right.
Not really, and then everybody's different in their stages of how, like, either, I know it sounds really weird, but like bowel movements, like that's a sign of like your digestive system. And so I just didn't have the proper, like I would be constipated for a whole week. Like it was miserable. Like I just felt so uncomfortable and bloated all the time. And it's funny because in high school, I was super skinny. And then I felt like when I got to chiropractic school, I gained so much weight and I wasn't sure why. And it's obviously because of what I was eating. I was super inflamed and I had no idea. So, fast forward, I ended up getting married with my husband and we're having children and I have a family of 6. So my mom was super fertile, and I was like everybody else in my family. It was fine, and it was very frustrating to me because I'm like, I don't understand why I'm having so many issues. And so, unfortunately, I had quite a few miscarriages leading to that because I didn't know. And then the first thing I would grab is like a bagel or bread to help with the nausea, and unfortunately, that was not the proper thing to do when you have celiac. So, one doctor just said, "Hey, you know what? Just try to go gluten free for a year and just see what happens." I'm like, okay. So I did. I was gluten free for a year. And sure enough, I got pregnant. And I was like, okay, cool. So maybe I'm just like intolerant. Like I just thought like something sensitive to it and didn't think anything of it. So ended up being really diligent the whole time I was pregnant with her and had a beautiful baby and healthy. And then so like 4 or 5 years after she was born, I still ate like here and there. I'm like, well, I'm just sensitive, so I'll just eat. And I think a lot of people do this. They're like, oh, it's okay to cheat here and there if I'm sensitive. But the reality is we have to really take it completely out of our diet. So I had no idea. And one day, my family was on a trip. Like they were like all girls. There was like it's a Christian like Girl Scout kind of thing. And they go camping and my husband volunteered to help them. So I literally was home by myself. I had the animals because I live on a farm. I had the animals outside. I had to bring all the goats in to the barn. I felt like I could not get out of bed. Like something was not right. And I was super scared. It almost felt like I had MS, like to the point that I physically, if I got up, I fell. It was very scary. And I felt super dizzy and I didn't know what was going on. And so I ended up calling a friend. I was like, hey, can you just come help me with the animals? Because I really don't know what's going on with me. I'm kind of scared because I'm by myself and I've never felt like this before. And it's interesting how it led to that point in my life that I'm like, holy cow, there is something seriously wrong with me and I need to figure this out, So I'm like, I don't know what's going on. And so I called a friend and I'm like, can you run some blood tests on me and just to see what's going on? And found out that my mile markers for inflammation was like off the charts. And I had an autoimmune disease. It's just like populating there. And then we looked at all the factors and she's like, it's all leading to celiac is what it looks like. And I'm like, okay. So then I started to get better because I'm like, all right, I have to be more diligent about this. But before it led to that, I started having like really bad anxiety. Like I've always had such bad anxiety, like even in high school, college, and all my life, and my dad. So I wonder if like I got it from him because he faced really bad anxiety. I am that type of person that doesn't take medication. I don't really believe in it. So I never took it. So I've never taken medication for my anxiety. And so it got so bad that it's like you just want it to get out of your head. Like you're just constantly replaying the same thing and it's so stressful. And I'm like, I don't know what to do. Like get out of my head. But once I became more diligent on gluten-free diet, I can't even describe that. It's just amazing. Like I can have stressful situations and physically think it through. Like I have changed completely on everything. Like I feel so great. I feel so good that I can like function properly. I can think. And when they say that brain fog, that's no joke. Like I would forget things and I'm like, holy cow. what is going on? Where am I? Like, it is so scary. And then the more I studied about gluten and how that affects your brain and, um, all those proteins that, and I know a lot of people talk about leaky gut, but I don't know if they really understand what leaky gut truly is. You know, that's what everybody always said. Oh, we have leaky gut.
Well, yes, because leaky gut is one of the precursors to autoimmunity. So yes, of course you have leaky gut. And for those of you for those of you who are listening who don't know what leaky gut is, it is essentially where your intestinal cells are fairly close together. They selectively move apart a little bit so that certain things can get through and other things can't. And when you have a lot of inflammation and trauma to your gut, those cells go apart further and bigger proteins and bigger things get into your bloodstream. And that allows your immune system to start acting on them. And that's how a lot of times autoimmunity arises. And so, yeah, that's a big, big thing. It's a problem. And we were talking about this before we got on and started recording, but the environment, the quality of the food in general that we're eating, not just gluten, and the air and the water, the soil, all of it. There's so much the things we're putting on our bodies, all of the things that all
laundry detergents and deodorant.
Yep. All of this stuff, it adds up.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of people realize, and I'm one of those people, I give myself the same credit, but as soon as something happens to you, like trauma wise, I think we try to figure out, okay, how can we go forward? How can we fix this? And this is kind of how I was trying to figure out in my life, how am I going to make this better? And I live in a family at the time, like I cook for my family, and how am I going to cook for them at this point? Like I was just at a loss. Like I didn't know what to do. And I'm very thankful that we live on the farm because we pretty much grow all of our food. If we could, except for rice, that'd be pretty cool if I can, because I eat a lot of rice.
All right.
But we don't, obviously have to purchase that and certain things, but our meat is definitely, everything's ours. Like I feel weird going somewhere else eating it just because I don't know where that food came from, I guess, like going out to eat. And obviously going out to eat has changed for us completely because I'm scared to go anywhere. The cross-contamination is a big deal. And I've gotten to the point I've gotten so sick that it almost feels like a hangover. Like everybody has different extremes. And mine is definitely not fun.
Right. No, exactly. You're right. I mean, these are all very real things for people who have celiac or like non-celiac gluten sensitivity. There's like different categories, and people, you can have just a straight up gluten sensitivity. You could have non-celiac gluten sensitivity, which is it's more advanced. And then you've got celiac. So you're like, across the board, we've got the spectrum of a condition that I still think is grossly underdiagnosed. It's estimated that 1% of the world's population has it. I think it's probably closer to 3 to 5% because of the fact that it's not reported. It's so often, I can't even tell you the number of people that I know that are like, oh yeah, I've got celiac, but it wasn't, reported, to, the authorities that do all of the recording. So I'm like, and you see people react to it all the time that are still not aware that they have an issue. So, I mean, I think it's much more significant and it's rising. I read some statistics recently that said it's rising at a rate of at about, I think it was 7.5% in kids and higher in women. Men, it's not as bad for many reasons, but a lot of it has to do with hormones and whatnot. But kids are more vulnerable. Women are more vulnerable. And it's like, I mean, my practice, I see women and kids. And for the longest time, the vast majority of what I was seeing were people with celiac and Hashimoto's and ulcerative colitis. But celiac is by far the most prevalent condition of all the autoimmune conditions that I see. And I see it run in families. And then you get into the situation where we were talking about where the mom will do gluten-free for herself, but not for the rest of the family. And that does not work. It doesn't work because if you have gluten in your house, you are not gluten-free. So that's something we wanted to make a point of talking about that because you are still cross-contaminating yourself. So I would love for you to talk more about that, because you have your business and you make a point of making sure that everything is clean.
I found out that my youngest daughter, she has either a sensitivity or we're not sure, but the reason why I know is because we were out in Yellowstone and she had a malt shake. I didn't know it was a malt. Like it had malt, which is gluten in it. I had no idea. My husband and my daughter ordered it, but they said they got her a milkshake, right? Like I didn't know milkshake versus a malt shake are very different. So she got in the car and she had like, and this kid, I'm telling you, if she can have sweets like every 5 minutes, she totally would. And I really try to break that addiction from her. But she's like, Mom, I don't want my milkshake. I don't want it anymore. And I'm like, really? And I'm like, it's strawberries because she's not really a chocolate fan. And she goes, no, I just make my tummy hurt. And I was like, okay. And so I said to my husband and my daughter, I'm like, so what was in this? Just curious. And then it was like, it's a malt shake. I'm like, so with malt? And they're like, yeah. I was like, huh. And then I was like, so what does your tummy feel like? And she's just describing the pain that I completely understand. And for her to say no to it, I knew something was going on. And she's always complained like her tummy hurts, or when she was a baby, which is very interesting. I wish I kind of was more knowledgeable in that area at the time. When she was a baby, she had like these, like, it almost looked like rosacea on her face. Like her face was very red and I didn't know what was going on. She was super constipated baby. And I guess what I gave her, like I couldn't breastfeed at the time. So I gave her formula, which who the heck knows what's in that sometimes. And then I gave her the oatmeal, like to thicken it up. Right. And so if it's not gluten-free, so she's getting exposed to this stuff. And I just saw the progression. And then so when she got older, she still had like these like little red rosacea on her face. And then the back of her arms, the bumps. Have you ever seen those? Like the bumps and the white bumps with like the red.
Yep, it's keratosis pilaris. It comes, it's very, very common with people with gluten issues.
Mm-hmm. So she had like all of those. And I was like, okay. So I told her, I said, listen, when we get back to Colorado from Yellowstone, we're going gluten-free for a month. And she was struggling in school a little bit prior to that. Like the teacher would be like, hey, like her mind's not really focused and it's interesting. And so once we went completely gluten-free with her, like everything changed. Like her face was beautiful, like in the sense of very clear, no more bumps. Her mind, like she excelled super fast. They're like, oh, what, are you practicing with her doing more? And I'm like, not really. But at the same time, I really think it's all from eating properly. So now her brain fog is more focused. And it was just fascinating to see, I guess, from my own perspective, to see her grow from that. And it's just so real. It's just like, wow, like you really had this problem. And now she feels better, never really complains about her stomach anymore. And she goes normal bowel movements. And I just felt so bad. Like I just felt horrible. But, then comes the lunch at school, like what do I make her?
Right. And that's, I make my kids lunch, and I think you do too, right? You make your kids lunch. Yeah. Because I don't trust the quality. Just straight up. I see what the menu is and there's no way I would send my kids to school with that. But then also
Herbs.
Yeah, yes, it is. It's not very well balanced at all. But yeah, a lot of it is just like gluten. And I'm like, no, I'm not giving that to my kids. But it's interesting because there's so many myths surrounding like gluten and celiac. And it was like, we kind of already touched on the one where like only one person in the family has to be gluten-free. No, everybody has to be gluten-free. And it's like, people don't even, I think, understand the magnitude. It's like not just food. They put gluten in so many products. You could have it in personal care products, straws, drywall, like so many places in your world could have gluten. And I will say most of my celiac patients don't have that big of a reaction, but I've had one where it was like everything in her universe. Like it all, she had to make sure it was gluten-free. Otherwise her body was super reactive. And then the other thing that you brought up was her brain and the anxiety and like the, just brain function. Most people think that celiac is like a digestive issue. It really isn't. It is actually, it's systemic. First of all, it's an immune system issue, right? But it's also systemic. And it's funny because I hang around with a lot of people who are like autoimmune specialists, and everyone in those corners are like, we wish that it was not found by a gastroenterologist. We wish it was like a neurologist or even a dermatologist, because those are where the symptoms show up more. For every person who has celiac and has the symptoms, 7 out of 10 symptoms are outside of the gut. A lot of people don't get all of the gut symptoms. It's like you're lucky if you get the pain and all of the stuff that signals that it's gut, because a lot of times it manifests as like what you said. It's brain fog, a bad memory, mood related issues, anxiety off the charts, but then also skin stuff. You've got the rashes and the rosacea, the keratosis pilaris, like dermatitis herpetiformis is the, celiac manifestation on the skin. So it's like all of that stuff. There's so many myths surrounding it. And it's like, even though even though we have better diagnostic tools, it's like, it's still hard for a lot of different clinicians to pick up on the fact that it could potentially be celiac, right? I mean, it's a struggle.
It falls into so many different categories.
Yeah.
They just look through, oh, well, it could be this or it could be this. And it's interesting. I feel like a lot of people should just give it a try. Just go gluten-free and see how you feel. I really tell people, I'm like, just go gluten-free and see.
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel so lost because they don't know what that means.
Yep.
What is gluten-free?
I know. I think in our world, sometimes we take it for granted because we've gone down this rabbit hole. Like for my family, because there is celiac and Hashimoto's in my family, and then also for my patients. But it's like if you live in that world, you don't realize how much people don't actually know, and you do take it for granted. And it's like, it's funny because sometimes you get the pushback of, and this is like mainstream media language. They're like, well, if you go gluten-free, you're going to be deficient in a lot of nutrients. And I'm like, yeah, if you go gluten-free and you just eat bread all the time, like the gluten-free bread, you might be. But if you actually eat a healthy,
processed gluten-free stuff.
Yeah. But if you eat a, healthy, whole foods, well-balanced and diversified diet, no, you won't be. It's funny. All the little things that people will say, I'm like, that's not true. It's a lot of times that's like the mainstream agenda, who doesn't want the world to be gluten-free because, it might take away the a financial source
from, billions of dollars.
Yes, millions of dollars, right? It's like, it's crazy, all of that stuff. So one thing I would love for you to kind of touch on is how, like, what was the decision process or the thought process for you when you decided that you were going to start a business? So you took something that was obviously painful, and with the miscarriages and everything that happened. And it can be, like you said, it can be so confusing and frustrating to go through that process and then make it a positive, and start a business. Can you walk us through that? Because I think it's a great way of just highlighting the fact that, we have so much resilience and we can take negatives and make them a positive.
Oh gosh, absolutely. And honestly, it's really deep in my heart, like what you just said. And I talk to my husband about this quite often. I'm like, you have a dream in your heart, and my dream was always to help people. How that looked, I don't know what that was going to be in my future, right? And so you always ask, like, oh, what is my purpose? And what am I here for? And you just always ask these questions. And I realized that my journey, some people like, oh, isn't it painful to talk about it? Or is it embarrassing or some, like, I hear all these different things from different people. And I'm like, I look at it, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, it happened to me. But if I can help one person, like with that miscarriage, like maybe they didn't know, like, okay, you're having multiple miscarriages, maybe go gluten-free. I'm not saying everybody's like that, but hey, if I was desperate for that information, why not try? Like, it's not going to hurt anything. You're just eating differently, or your anxiety is like off the charts. Like, I can't describe to you how crazy I felt like in my head. Like, but I was like a functioning anxiety person. I don't know how to explain that, but I see people that can't handle it. And so I feel like having to be able to talk to people about it, and I took that into my business. Like, I felt like there's a seed planted in me. Was it the seed that I thought it was going to be? No, but at the same time, I feel so refreshed. And it's interesting. I started in September and things are really booming. And I feel like, okay, this is my journey. And this is what I really feel like I'm here for, to help people enjoy food again. Like, I feel like people think of gluten-free, like disgusting, gross. I'm like, hmm,
It's come a
it-
long way.
The-
It's come a long
Yeah.
way, right?
yes, completely. And like, I make raviolis, I do pierogies, and people say to me like, "Oh my gosh, I've had this disease for so many years and I haven't had it in so long." Or my kid has had celiac and I've always wanted him to try it. Or it's empowering to me. It makes me feel really happy and proud that I could do that for others, because I understand the struggle. Like, and bread was my go-to for everything. And having, no offense, like some of these commercial breads that are gluten-free are not very good. And um I think people don't realize, like, I make gluten-free bread, and granted, it doesn't stay as long as other breads, and it's because there's no preservatives. So you have to really think about eating it within 3 days or something like that, because if you want it to taste fresh and taste good, that's how it is. But we think it's pretty crazy to think in the store it stays on those shelves for weeks.
I know.
You're like,
I know.
"Eesh, what is in there?"
Right? I
You
know.
know?
Yeah, it shouldn't last that long. Like, real food and fresh food should not last that long. So that's so exciting. Yeah, I actually went and bought a couple of the bags of pierogies this weekend. So I'm super excited to try it, because that was something that I was missing.
Oh,
Yeah, I'm super excited. That
Did you
was
go to the
something I was,
fair?
yeah, I did. I finally made it out there, and
Nice.
I'm super excited, because that's something I haven't had. I can't even tell you, probably at least 20, maybe 25 years. And I'm Polish in my ancestry, and I love pierogies. And I'm super duper excited to make them. I'm waiting till next week when the kids are out of school for Thanksgiving. But I'm gonna make them. I'm so
Oh,
excited.
that's awesome. So like, our story about behind that is my husband's Ukrainian, and his mom's like Ukrainian and Polish actually. And then his dad's Italian. And so, but we every it was Christmas Eve that we would have pierogies. Pierogies and fish is like our tradition. And so we ended up, when I was gluten free, I would just watch them eat this. And I was just so sad. And it was super depressing to me. And then once I found out that I'm like, oh my gosh, like, she needs to be a part of this. This is part of our tradition. It's different when you have your kid and you're like, then you put your all into it. You're like, okay, it's not about me anymore. It's about her. And I want to figure this out. Was an epic fail for sure. Gluten-free flour is a lot different to work with. It's not as doughy, it's more sticky. So I had to really figure that out. And so I think I've tried like quite a few times, and I figured it out, and we ate it for Christmas Eve that one year, and everybody's like, and I gave it to everybody because our whole house was gluten-free. And so friends came over and they had no idea that it was gluten-free. And I was like,
I love
now
that.
that's a testimony.
That is. It really is.
When they say that, I'm like, okay, that's a compliment, in the sense of like, I figured it out. Like, I figured out the texture. It even has the texture of the other pierogies. And so feel like that's where my goal was, to have everybody enjoy and bring back childhood like memories. Like, was like in tears. Like this lady was telling me, she's like, oh my gosh, you don't understand how this brought joy to me. It reminds me of the time with, I had it with my mom, and there was like an elderly lady. Like it was beautiful because it made me feel good that I was able to do that. Now, granted, I do not look Polish, and people may say those things, but I did learn from his grandma. Like I learned from, like, I did
From the OG.
I wasn't gluten-free.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. That's
And
awesome.
I think a lot of people, that's the part that I'm just like, and I just want to expand our business and make empanadas and different things. But I have to get my USDA. So we're expanding as we go. And I'm really excited about that journey, and to bring, honestly, some of the East Coast vibe to Colorado, if that makes sense. Like different flavors and cultures. And I'm all about the different cultures. Like I used to like bring my kids to different restaurants. Like, oh, we're going to an Indian restaurant today. We're going to a Greek restaurant. Like I want them to be well diverse of the different foods and your palate and your mouth. You know what I mean? Like to have different flavors. And some people may not know what certain things are, but some people just give it a try. So that's what I want to do. I want to bring the cultures back to people, like memories. And it's like very fulfilling to me. And I feel really passionate about it. I'm super excited.
I know. And the passion comes through, and it's like, it's amazing. And because I get it. It's like when I work with families, it's the same thing. It's like when you can help heal a kid who's been suffering for a long time and their parents are like over the moon. There's nothing better than that feeling. Or likewise, working with a mom who's been struggling for a really long time. There's nothing better than the feeling of helping those people. And that's what you're doing. I mean, food is so intimately ingrained and entwined in us. I mean, we need it for survival, but it's so cultural, and there's so much like magic and joy that can come from it. And like when you do get that, I would say is probably one of the biggest hurdles for people to overcome when they get a diagnosis of anything autoimmune, or especially celiac, because there are foods that you have to avoid in order not to make it, active, and causing issues and symptoms. And that does it, like it can drain people of joy. That is probably the biggest struggle. And when I work with people, they're always like, when can I go back on gluten, or when can I go back on this? And with gluten, celiac, it's a no-go. With other conditions, maybe sometimes like I'll tell people, like if you have something like that's imported from Europe, that's clean and not from North America, maybe you can have it. With another autoimmune condition. Usually with GI autoimmune conditions, I'm like no gluten, nothing ever. But with other ones, sometimes like with Hashimoto's and some of the other conditions that I see that are, not quite as gut dominant, it's interesting. I'm like, you might be able to tolerate it. I had one patient who had 3 or 4 autoimmune conditions, and she reached out to me just recently, and we had her on a very, 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 very pared down diet. It was like we had her rotating like a protein, a fat, and a carb like 7 days a week. So that's all she was eating because that's all she could really tolerate. It usually had maybe a little bit of olive oil on it, and then salt and pepper, sometimes not pepper because the pepper could get to her. And she went from that to being able to expand her diet to a very clean whole foods diet. And then and that was a couple of years ago. And I talked to her the other day, and she was like, guess what? She's like, I can actually tolerate so many things now, like almost everything. She's like, I had an incidental gluten exposure, and she's like, I did not react at all. And normally what would have happened, she would have gotten boils all over her face, like massive, not just like, rosacea or like pimples or a rash, but massive boils all over her face and neck. And she's like, I did not have anything happen. And I'm like, that's amazing. I mean, and that's a testament to like the immune resilience you can build up once you take out things that are, causing the issue and, from the first place, like all of the root causes. So, I mean, the fact that you are providing such amazing gluten-free food to people is incredible, because it's funny. I think I said to you when we met the first time, like, I know people in the autoimmune space who write all these cookbooks. And one of the things that they said is they could never get a pierogi recipe right. And I think it's because, like you said, it was so much trial and error, because that was one of the things I was looking for. Because one of, I don't know, are you familiar with Isabella Wentz? She's a Hashimoto's like specialist, and she has written a ton of books.
Very familiar, yeah.
She's written a lot of books, but also has a cookbook out there. And she's Polish. And so it was funny because I was like, there's no pierogies. And she's like, no, she's like, that was like a really hard thing to figure out. And so, yeah, so there's other Polish recipes in there, but there were not pierogies. I'm like, I just want to try pierogies again.
Well, that's awesome. See, that makes me so happy. And I really think it's like that dopamine effect for people. Like, I always say that analogy of like, oh, you smell chocolate chip cookies, and maybe that smell reminds me of your grandma. Like, she used to bake them. And so that's why some people maybe have dysfunction with eating sometimes, because they maybe have those smells or those feelings associated with food. And you would know probably more than that, how that all correlates. But, I just wanted to bring back memories. Like, every time they put a pierogi or taste the pierogi, to bring back those memories. Like, I really think food is medicine in so many ways. Food is medicine and eating healthy, but it's also a way of like bringing back memories or gathering together. It's always a time of being together. And so I really wanted to bring that to the home. And like, I wanted to do quick meals too. When we were talking about families, and they're just like really, everybody's doing sports, or they're just always so busy. And then maybe they go grab a burger, which is not maybe their best choice, but it's fast food and it's something they can grab. So my thought is like, all my stuff is frozen, takes 10 minutes to really make. If you really think about it, it's just boiling it. And they float to the top, and they even tell you they're ready. They come up from the bottom being so heavy to floating to the top. And if you want to make them a little crispier, you could air fry them or pan fry it, but it's super simple. Like, that is my goal, to make things very simple for people. And eventually I want to get to the point that I can do like meals to go, like ready to go, and you don't have to really think about it. And I'm not really a microwave person, so it'd be more like cooking it, but easy.
Yeah, it's not. When I have a busy day, and that's, like I said, we talked about meal prepping. I do a lot of meal prepping, but then I get into the middle of the week, and lots of times the kids have activities, whether it's a sport or my daughter has a reading group that she goes to. And it's like yesterday, I was like running around, and I was like, what am I going to make? I ended up doing some like kind of stir fry really quick and like rice, because the rice cooks up really, really quickly. But it was probably about a 15-minute process. And I feel like that was not overwhelming. There are some things that I do on the weekend, and it is a long process. And I'm like, I don't have time for that during the week. So that brings up a really good point of like integrating like gluten-free. And I always tell people not to think of it as a diet, but more of a lifestyle. And that it frames it differently. And so when you think of it as a lifestyle, it makes it a little bit easier to like wrap your brain around and then integrate into your life. But what kind of tips would you have for moms and families about, doing gluten-free with little ones?
So honestly, with my youngest, like she still has a cookie. Like, a lot of people are like, oh, she's gluten free. I have created a mix and it's all like, you can make it with your kids. And I really think it's truly important to do things with your kids. Like, I feel like, um, I don't necessarily know if it's my generation or another generation. They don't know how to cook. Like, a lot of people don't know how to cook, and it's unfortunate that they weren't taught it from their parents. And I really feel like it's important to teach your kids while you're cooking, like, hey, we're going to do this, and this is how we're going to make it. And I actually give my girls like once a week, they have to make it together, make a meal, dinner for us, but it also has to be healthy. Like obviously in our house, they have to choose what we have here, right? But I think it's so important for them to learn. So when I talk about like, I think a lot of times kids have the hardest time being gluten free of like going to a birthday party. Okay, let's just say. Um, you have to really think about it as a parent, like, okay, hey, you know what? I probably should go get her a gluten-free cupcake, or I'll make one. We do have lollies, which is local to us, which is pretty cool. I've bought her like something like a pastry from there, just to take if I was busy. Just you really just have to really prepare yourself and think about it prior to. But like eating wise, like pizzas and I make my own pizza. We make our own dough and it's super fun for the kids. They love it. And people are like, I don't have time for that. Like, okay, well then make a batch of it over the weekend, like you were saying, throw the dough in the fridge and then roll it out when you're ready to eat it. There's different ways of doing it. It's all about preparing ahead of time. And it's super fun for the kids, especially pizza. Like my daughter loves it. She gets to put her own toppings on it and put the cheese, and it's just a fun experience. Like you don't want to say, hey, you have celiac or gluten intolerance, so it's going to be horrible, but it's not. We eat the same thing that everybody else eats. And honestly, my husband is not really gluten free, but I really think that we all have some type of sensitivity. Um, his joints, I told him, I was like, you probably have like arthritis or something like that. And it's all correlated to the inflammation. And once he has taken the gluten completely out, he doesn't complain about that anymore. He used to get these massive headaches all the time. And now he doesn't have that. It's funny how some people like think, and it's really cool because he's super supportive and very understanding. But it's interesting for him to physically realize the change. He even says, like, oh, since we've been eating this way, like, I don't get these headaches anymore. I don't feel the pain in my joints anymore. It's like you're decreasing all that inflammation. And the question of the day is like, is it gluten or is all the pesticides in our food? Like, there's just so many factors, like we were talking about before, that correlates with it. But I really do feel like gluten, I have to call it glue, really. It's just like puts everything together and makes that.
Well, that's why it's a drywall, because
happen.
they use it as a glue, right?
Yeah.
It's used as a glue in all of those products.
Yep. And it's interesting you just said that because my husband does construction. We did our basement, and that's when I was feeling really sick. So
interesting.
That was like a correlation. And when you said that, I was like, oh, the basement was being done. And I felt so paralyzing because I was doing it too. I was touching it and working with it, the fumes of it. God, it's awful. I love that you brought that up because now it made me think. I was like, huh, yeah. And my husband complains of headaches every time he works with drywall. So I bet he has what I have.
I love it. I know.
Admit it.
A lot of people don't want to admit it. A lot of people will be in denial until they can't be. I find it's really, really interesting. Even people who have seen on paper that it says like you have celiac, like we're human, like everybody. I find the biggest thing is that if you step away from the identity and the diagnosis and the label, it's easier for you to manage, because when you identify with a diagnosis or a label, it puts you in that little tiny box, and it's really hard to move beyond that like little tiny space when you're sick. And it's like, I've had people who literally their labs were looking great. The antibodies had gone away, but they were still like so stuck in the space of, oh, I'm celiac, I'm this or that they weren't feeling good. And it's like, that's when we have to start working on like the emotional aspects and the identity and all of that, which is a huge piece of it. But I mean, it's societally, like, I think it comes back again to that point where it's like, it's food, and food is so powerful, like within us, even just thinking about it, like thinking about food has such a powerful effect on our biochemistry. So it's like, it's a crazy thing. So I wanted to ask you, about, that particular piece of the puzzle for yourself. Like, do you feel now like you don't identify with, with the celiac diagnosis per se? Because I mean, I think I've said, like, I've had Hashimoto's antibodies in the past. I don't say I have Hashimoto's. I've had the antibodies in the past. I don't have them anymore. I haven't had them in like 9 years. And so it's one of those things where, and like Lyme, I've had Lyme in my body before. I don't say I have Lyme. Like, I'm like, I won't. I'm like, I won't go there. Right. Yeah. So how are you, and like, how do you feel about that?
It's really cool that you said that, because honestly, like, I don't really think of it that way anymore. I always feel like we all should be eating better anyway. And I feel like it actually, even though it's something that impacted my life, it's also a blessing to me. I feel like, because now I'm like, all right, I need to change. We eat super clean. Like, for example, like yesterday, we had roasted chicken and a salad and then a vegetable. Like, I feel like we eat so much better. Like, all the carbs and everything put into it is not the best option, And we all know the pyramid that the government has created is not really good for us. I feel like a lot of people don't realize, like, unfortunately, like, they think, like, especially my mom and my family, like, they think that's the go-to, right? Like, that's the standard. That's what they're telling us to do. And like, yeah, cereal in the morning's really not the best option. Maybe an egg or something else. And then you hear all these different stories about, oh, eggs aren't good for you. I'm like, you're kidding me right now, right? Like, there's just so many different things that people just have to realize. Like, I feel great. Like, I feel better now than I did 10 years ago, or even when I was in college. Like, it's crazy, like, all the energy. And so I really feel like it's a blessing to me. Like, I feel like, okay, cool. Now I know. And I even tell my daughter, I'm like, just because sometimes she's like, Mom, I hate being gluten-free because my friends, and it's a stigma, right? Like, kids can be mean.
And kids can be mean about it sometimes, right?
Yeah. And like, we hear things on TV like, oh, are you one of those gluten-free people? And it's like, like, you hear all these like stigmas or fads or whatever they call them. And my oldest is like, why do they always do that? And I'm like, I don't know. It's like, it was kind of like the plant-based diet. Like, everybody want to do plant-based diet. And I'm like, do you? But
I
that's
know.
a whole nother story, another day.
Right.
But
Right.
it's interesting to me, like, or exactly what you said to me. I had my in-laws say that to me. Oh, if you go gluten-free, that it can affect you in the long run if you're not gluten-free. I'm like, really? No. Like, just like you said before. So it's interesting. People hear these things. I think it's important for us to educate ourselves and sometimes block out some of the things that people are saying. Because I can always back up my stuff. Like, hey, I looked at a medical journal, and honestly, don't only stay in the States of the United States. Look other places like Europe and Canada just to see what their research is. And it's quite interesting, the difference sometimes. Remember, we can't always publish everything here, if you know what I'm saying. So it's just important to evaluate those things. And that's why we went with like our meat and making sure it's hormone free. And there's so many different factors that come into it, right? Like, my gut is super sensitive to certain things. Like, I remember I was very sick at one point and I had to take a medication and I just can't take it. Like, my body just doesn't like those things. Like, I'm very sensitive to many things. And so it's interesting. Like, I think people really have to understand. Don't think of it as like a curse. Someone said that to me. Like, do you feel like it's a curse?
Yes.
No.
I was just going to say that it's not a curse. People feel like it's like that,
I
right?
think it's so funny how people say things, and I'm just like,
They're programmed.
no.
We are
I'm like,
programmed, right?
and the person that said it to me is very unhealthy. You know what I'm saying? And it's funny for them to tell me that. I'm like, well, it's just making me healthier because now I know. I'm more aware of what I eat. So I think that's what's important.
Yeah, you brought up a really good point. the fact that it is a blessing. It's like, that's what I tell patients. I'm like, I feel like if you flip the script and go away from the curse and seeing it as a gift or a blessing, I mean, it is literally your body telling you that something is not good for it. So embrace it and, work with that. And it really can. I mean, look at you. You're a perfect example. Like, you changed the health of your family. You changed your health. You turned it into a business that is bringing joy to so many people. And that's such a gift. And I'm so grateful that we have you in our community here. For people who are listening, we live in the Monument, Colorado area. And it's a blessing. So her products are going to be where they are available here. And I know she's trying to branch out too. So that'll be really exciting. So if people are looking for you, where can they find you?
You can definitely go to 3farmgirls.shop. And that's our website, or you can go to our Instagram, which is 3farm_girls, I think. Sorry, 3farmgirls. So, but there's the underscores underneath. But definitely, you can reach out to me. My plan is to eventually venture to the East Coast and get over there. It's interesting. We talked about manufacturers and so forth, but gluten-free is a very distinctive type of pliable material, if that makes sense. Like, it's not as, the gluten is what keeps everything together. And so I'm just very particular on how I do things. So right now, everything is made by us. And the 3 Farm Girls, and talk about entrepreneurship, my daughters are part of our business. That's why it's the 3 Farm Girls. So I do the gluten-free frozen foods. And then my youngest does like freeze-dried candies, and they're also dye-free because we're very particular about that as well. And then she also does like lotions and salves with me. And so lately we've been doing some hot cocoa bombs, which she's really enjoying that because she gets to put the stuff inside it. And it's really fun to be together doing those things. And then my oldest is super talented, and I can't take any credit because I don't even know how to do it. She crochets and knits. So she learned by herself by YouTube, which is, YouTube could be a good thing and it could also be a terrible thing, but she really took it for the good and learned from that. And so that's what the 3 of us do. And we all work together, and they come with me to the commercial kitchen sometimes. Youngest can't yet. So it's kind of challenging in that sense. But my oldest does. Like, she helps me out. But it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. I love that. That's so amazing. Well, thank you so much for being on today and sharing your story. And you're just like, I love the way that you totally, altered course and, made something that a lot of people perceive to be negative, an amazing positive. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
If you made it this far, I truly appreciate you. Remember, knowledge is just the beginning. Taking action is what truly sparks change. If you're overwhelmed and don't have enough energy to make it through the day, I invite you to book a free 20-minute coaching call with me. It's a no-obligation chat where we can discuss your health goals and how I might be able to help you achieve them. Visit the link in the episode description to book that call. Until next time, keep striving for wellness, and remember, you have the power to not just survive, but thrive in motherhood.